Hi there. Thanks, everybody. This is Mary Ellen Slayter here with and I'm here with Alaura Weaver, and I'm very excited about this webinar. But the first thing I want to do is introduce myself. I'm Mary Ellen Slayter. I'm the CEO and founder of RoadCap, and I am your host for this webinar. I came to content marketing 12 years ago now, apparently. Before that, I was a journalist who worked at the Washington Post for many years. So coming in from that traditional service journalism background, I wrote a career advice column. And then I mostly worked as a financial journalist. So lots of interesting stuff going on. And the cool thing about being a content marketer now is I still get to tell cool stories. So I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and that is where I am coming in from. And the next thing, let's go to my slide. I have a master's in journalism, and I have an undergrad's in agronomy, and I'll answer questions about soil science, at the end. Save those questions. Next, I am super excited to introduce Alaura Weaver, whose work I admire so much. She's has the most meta job in all of content marketing right now. She is the head of content marketing at Writer, which is, I think as many of you know, my favorite of the Gen AI writing platforms. And she was before that, she actually was a content team lead over at Animals, which, is my second favorite content marketing agency. So what's not to love here? So without any further ado here, Alaura, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. And in terms of weird background stuff, I have my background is in theater, and obviously we have that storytelling link together. And I imagine many people in the audience are, story nerds as well. So I'm excited to get into talking about how we can make stories happen in a brilliant way with generative AI.
And what's funny about this too is you and I both had some other things in common. We also both really love sci-fi. We like sci-fi a lot. I have that coffee mug. I should have brought that coffee mug in here. I have that mug. And I think in some ways people ask me, how did I know that this Gen AI stuff was coming? Because we were very well prepared for it. And I've been training people, how'd you know it was coming? I was like, do y'all not watch sci-fi? Did you not watch Star Trek?
Right? I mean, hello.
That was my preparation for this. That's how I prepared for this. I think also theater is a pretty dang good preparation for it. I do a talk that I've been doing for a few years off and on. Actually, again, things that I was doing kind of early on around in defense of the liberal arts in the age of AI. And one of the things that I basically talked about how the real skills here that we need are not so much technical skills, they're these other skills, and they actually come from things that we traditionally would get from liberal arts. And one of them is the ability to improvise and adapt. And I said, if you're looking for that, go hire the theater kids.
Literally, prompts are what theater kids are trained on. We are constantly being given situations to improvise off of and given circumstances to live within. And that's what you're doing with generative AI and with language models. You're asking them to adapt to the given circumstances of whatever situation you're providing it. So yes to theater degree, yes to liberal arts, communication, critical thinking, anything like that is going to help you thrive within this new era.
See, I love that you described that way, because I think people think that this is about the technology. And while I do think it's important to understand the technology and to understand its limitations, I think that sometimes we overemphasize, like when people say prompt engineering, and it's like, well,
I'm allergic to that term, honestly. As an end user, if you are working in ML, if you're working in data science, yes, there is engineering involved in prompting. I prefer to call it prompt crafting as an end user, because that's when the subtle art of communication comes into play. Yeah.
I also often tell people, if you hated writing briefs before, if you found writing a brief challenging, you're not going to love writing prompts. Because it's like,
I have thoughts on that. We can talk about that later, but yes.
It's like it's a skill. It's just a skill. So
it is a skill.
All right. So what are we going to talk about today? I want to talk about, what does it mean to be a thought leader in this age, right? And how do you make sure that you're using these tools in a way that are actually beneficial, to your thought leadership and to your ability? What I define thought leadership is one, having original thoughts. Step one is to have thoughts, and step two is to lead, right? And that means being willing to put them out in the world. You can't do much if you don't have step one. And I think one of the dangers sometimes is people are using AI in ways that I think mimic thought leadership, but but there are things you can do that actually help you get more of it, make more of it. The second piece is like taking things that you're already making, you're already creating, you've got these great ideas. How do you get them out of the ether or have time to develop, them and share them and turn them into things you can share, the leading part. And then just generally moving faster. I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it is I'm able to compensate for my weaknesses. Frankly, like there's the parts of it I really love, and there's the parts of it that I hate. And I delegate the parts that I hate to the AI. But you might hate different parts. And so what else did you want to talk about, Laura? Like, let's just kind of, what else?
Well, to yes, and speaking of theater,
yes.
When you talked about you have to have thoughts to be a thought leader, I think to yes, and that is to say it's not just thoughts, it's insights. It's specifically, it's not hot takes. You don't want to have water is wet thoughts, right? If you're just repeating the same thing other people are saying, then you could be an AI. But if you are genuinely having insights and bringing your perspective and helping shaping the way people can think about a topic or an industry, that's thought leadership right there. Yeah. And it's very exciting to see how we're bringing those type of insights from our perspective to our content and distribution channels with AI.
One of the things that I find there's often a lot of fretting, there's a lot of talk about risk and the risk of AI. And in some of the industries that I work a lot in highly regulated spaces with HR tech and financial services and insurance. And like, there are some real risks around things that we're doing. You don't writing people's performance reviews, with AI, like if you're not really careful, that can get really weird. When it comes to marketing, it comes to content specifically, I worry less about the legal stuff. People also were blocking it. We can't use it because can't copyright it. It's like, okay, the real risk to me is something very different. And it's actually the same risk we had before, which is most of the content out there is not thought leadership. And most of it is not interesting. The real risk is that you are going to be boring. And the way that I look at this is the test I've used for years. If I took your content and I placed it on your competitor site, could anybody tell the difference? And the answer was no. Right. Most of the time. Guess what? If you're using Gen AI cold, like you're just sitting down to ChatGPT and you're like, write me a blog post on this topic, all you're getting is the average of everything that has ever been written about that topic before. You are getting this, like, it's flattening it out. There's less really crappy stuff, but there's less good stuff too. Your odds of hitting something good are really low. And like, that to me is the biggest risk. Is like, this is just going to make you make more aggressively mediocre shit faster.
Absolutely.
I would say
Jay Akunzo, if you're a content nerd, you're familiar with him. He calls it commodity content. It's the stuff that's really, if we're talking about SEO content, it's written for the bots, and it's going to be interesting to see bots writing for other bots. And then it's going to be having this weird infinite reflection effect, right? Where the content is going to flatten out even further unless we bring our humanity to our content and thought leadership to our content. The thing that I always reflect on is how when I use just raw AI content, a lot of times I'll say, like, write an intro for this blog post as a first draft. And every single damn one starts with, in this fast-paced environment, right? And there's certain red flags that say this is AI generated. And also, we as B2B marketers have no one to blame but ourselves for that, because it's learning from us. It's learning from the stuff that we've created in the past. So that's the danger. The danger is delivering more generic stuff for these systems to learn from. And getting more
I use writer to ban that phrase. We actually used our writer to ban that phrase.
Yeah. I've set rules.
We're not allowed to say that. And it is interesting. It says that every single time, which I think tells us something about what we think about this. Like, yeah, it's like, that's just pushing it right back at us. And it's so, say something different. I mentioned, like, and kind of talk about this coming up this morning, I posted on LinkedIn that is like, I miss typos. Okay. I really miss typos, because one of the things that struck me recently is I looked at like the kind of things that I'm spending my time working on even as an editor. And I realized I can't remember the last time I saw a typo, like in like a blog post or something that made it to me as an editor. No, the copy is clean, as we say. It is so clean.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if I were to see a typo, I think I would be like, whoa,
It's
what
a
is
little
this?
sterile.
What is the hand typed, whatever am I looking at right now? You know? But
that's one of my predictions, actually, is that the value of the science of handcrafted work, regardless of whether it's video, written content or video or physical products, the science of handcrafted work is the value is going to increase so much. That there's actually, I think it's going to be a forcing function to really value actual artists and artisans and craftspeople, because people cherish those little moments as you sterilize the working environment.
Mm-hmm. So, but this is interesting for me and for you, because I think you and I are obviously both bullish on this tech. We enjoy this tech. We use it to augment our productivity. And yet we're also saying the same, like, hey, we need some. Viola, my friend Viola, who she does SEO, she has weird content. Like, she's just really, what do we do with this weird content? And I'm like, more weird content, please. More weird content. So I would just pop this up here because I'm curious. I would like to get your take on this. Like, I have a manifesto that I have created, like that I've been using to operate and guide myself as I think about how I, as a thought leader, I consider myself a serious person. Who has thoughts, right? What role does AI play for me? And I'm just going to run through these real quick. And I'm curious, I'd like to get your reaction to them and tell me what you think about them. And if you have things you would add, or if you have similar, like you have a similar kind of manifesto that you operate from. So number one for me is that AI creates, but I publish. I do not do anything that is automated. Like I will not automate the last mile, like ever, ever, ever. And I also really like tools that force me to stop and make approvals, which is something that Writer does. There's some tools we could talk about with the pre-built prompts and the way you write a blog post. I think you get better outputs like that. But it's really tempting. Like, you just want to make the whole thing go away, especially if you don't enjoy, the part of it. You still got to hit publish. My other rule is that I use it to augment the power of my thinking. I don't try to shortcut it, right? And that's also what I mean by I use it for delegate the parts that I hate. So you guys, a personality test, thinking test, my thinking preferences test, like in Herman's whole brain thinking, I'm pretty balanced between what they call red, yellow, and blue, which is like analytical, conceptual, and people relational. And I have like this tiny sliver of green that's for organizational. And I should have realized the first time I took that test, like that was the first sign that I should have gotten diagnosed with ADHD, like as an adult, because it's like, look, it's even in this test. But I know I don't like making lists, right? So what I would never sit down and use AI to give me ideas for things. Like, that is not my problem. I absolutely use it to take the hot mess of ideas that I have and order them, right? So that's augmenting my thinking. I'm not shortcutting it. I try to cover my blind spots. I try to think of things use it to think of things I might have missed. I'm very careful about confidential data. And then the number one thing for me, this goes back to the typo thing. It's like guarding against that perfect bullshit. As an editor over the years, I've always been I realized my brain is trained to think clean copy means good to go. Like, clean copy means clear thinking. Clean copy does not mean clear thinking when it comes from AI. It can actually be the most it's perfect. It can be perfect bullshit. But your brain, if you're an editor, doesn't register it in the same way as you would if it were sloppy. So I'm going to stop for a second. What's on your manifesto?
Well, I'm seeing Richard J's comment here about disagreeing with the phrasing AI creates. And I agree with Richard. I don't think AI creates. I think that AI generates. AI spits out a response to a prompt, but it does not create. So, and with that mindset, it helps me bring my creative perspective to whatever it is, and bring a very editorial eye to it, and say, and put myself also into the audience's position and say, is that to reflect off of number 5, is this bullshit? Do I need an expert to take a look at this? Am I the expert that needs to take a look at this? Or is there somebody else that needs to take a look at this before we publish? So yes, very much part of our editorial process, and we have our own internal guidelines for working with AI that I share with our freelancers. Augmenting the power of thinking. I legit have ADHD. I'm also on the autism spectrum, and very much use it as an accessibility device, honestly, to help me with clarity of thought when I'm, I might be towards the end of the day and very exhausted. And like, I know that there's a seed of an idea here, and I'll just be like, what do you call this? Or so it acts as a second brain for me sometimes. And then definitely with the bias problem, and also acknowledging, and that's kind of a forcing function, isn't it? Of saying, oh, wait, as a human, I have a bias problem, is a very kind of philosophical thing.
Right.
But it's also, if you're coming with this attitude of, I may not be the best arbiter of truth here, and being humble is an excellent approach, I think, to anything. And then obviously the data thing, Writer is, and that's the reason I work at Writer, is incredibly focused on responsible use of AI and building around responsible implementation and protecting privacy. So those are my thoughts. It might not be as clearly articulated as yours, but
well, I had the advantage of making a slide, so like I had that, but yeah, no, I mean, it is funny you mentioned in terms of like as a compensating for those weaknesses. And so for me, I also have a diagnosis, although I didn't get it until I was in my 40s, right? Because for women, girls didn't get that.
Yeah.
Like I didn't get that. Like, and I was growing up poor in North Louisiana. Nobody in the trailer park was like, unless you were causing trouble, right? It's like ADHD was a thing that boys did, and they were obnoxious and loud and disruptive, as opposed to a thing that a girl did. And that was just how she could go off and like not eat and not sleep and not do anything else, but totally like read the encyclopedia.
Yeah, so much potential, right? There's so much potential if we would just.
So it's been liberating. And like knowing that I'm able, honestly, I really do. I absolutely use it to compensate for what is in effect a disability that I never recognized. I had all kinds of coping mechanisms, but it was like, I felt like I got this turbo when Gen AI, these tools started coming out, that I got a turbocharged coping mechanism for that. So pretty great. Anybody else in terms of in the chat, like any other stuff you would add in terms of your manifesto? All right. Well, then I want to talk about use cases a bit, because I think this is where I want to just kind of dig in here with you, because we were chatting about this even right before this session, because you think about this even a little bit differently from the way that I do. Like, what do you think is the most important role that AI plays in supporting the development of thought leadership inside a marketing organization?
Well, when we were chatting, you talked about getting to like the 80% mark, right? And then layering humanity. We'll talk about that a little bit. But the process, like the aha moment that I'm discovering when I'm talking to people that are customers of Writer, and not just in marketing, but across the organization, is the internal enablement factor. So you were talking earlier about people not loving writing briefs. I don't love writing briefs. I can write a really good damn brief. I know what it looks like, but it takes so much time, because I also have a very high standard for what a good brief should be.
Me too.
Yeah?
There's a whole.
I think that's very important.
Yeah.
It's intrinsic to thought leadership development is to have a very strong brief, because you have to be able to communicate what is our point of view, what is the strategic purpose of this piece of content, where are the internal subject matter experts and resources that we can tap to bring this thing to creation. That's a lot of organizing in the background before you even put theoretical pen to paper, right? So what I started doing was I created a brief template. And at first I started feeding it to our Ask Writer, which is a chat interface, and said, please fill out this template based on the following, working title, target audience, and I think maybe a strategic purpose or something like that. And also I would give it like inspirational material and say, here's the inspirational material to work from. And it would do it. And it would save me a good 45 minutes of time alone with that,
And a painful
right?
45 minutes. Let's also be clear. It is not, that is a painful 45 minutes.
That is a painful 45 minutes. And then I would have to go in and adjust it, right? It wouldn't be like good to go, but it would still save me so much time. And then we released this app studio thing where we can actually no code create our own interface without having to go to write a chat from scratch every time, or a chat prompt from scratch every time. And now I have this perfectly formatted form brief that hits every single note and fulfills every single strategic purpose I have, just with like 4 fields filled out. And I can upload, a slide deck or something for it to riff off of. Boom, right? My job isn't replaced, but it is certainly freed up to bring my own thought leadership brilliance to the actual work itself. So that is illuminate. It was just a illuminating moment, was realizing, oh, it's not just for writing for me. It's not for that all. It can be, but it's not entirely for that. It's also for cutting down on those internal processes.
That's also an interesting piece, because that takes it a place where people think of content. This is something that's changed inside our agency. And I know as a former agency person who's now in-house and works and still talks to lots of agency people, I think you might kind of be curious to hear about this. Our jobs changed. Like last year, the rollout, when we adopted Writer like fully as our tool, one of the things that changed for us is Writer ceased to be a job at this agency. Like we had writers, junior writers, and they're only content marketing managers now. And content marketing managers are indeed responsible often for producing a lot of copy, but the expectations by the time you get to writing the post, it's not that they don't have a job. It's that they now spend more time on the research.
Yeah.
And they spend more time thinking, and they spend more time going, oh, why would we do that? Or what could we do instead?
What's interesting is that we actually have more of a need for, because we're also growing, we're a startup, but we have more for a need for writers now that we have this, and less of a need for managers.
Interesting.
Because that type of work, that internal enablement work, can be done by ahead of, for example, and delegated to writers, right? So it's now, okay, now go be brilliant. You have this tool that you can use, to help structure and everything. And we're handing off the research for you. And now it's about elevating the quality of whatever generic stuff that the AI delivers to you. And I consider that to be a writer. That's a writer's function, is taking and putting together that research and crafting the language, in addition to, and I consider the language to be, crafting the output, crafting the thoughts that the AI has generated. So different philosophy.
I think we're also probably using the terms a little differently too, because I think for us, the content, so being inside an agency, we're a small agency. So like content marketing manager, that person that actually is the person who's they're kind of driving, talking to the client, getting those ideas. I would say they're spending more time talking to the client and more time doing interviews and interacting with humans, and less time staring at their own screen. Is the way I would also say. I think there's more conversations happening. Yeah. So I actually, this was something I realized yesterday in terms of meetings. I'm spending more time in meetings, but they're very productive, very invigorating meetings.
Yeah, they're about tapping insights and saying, give me some stories. I want to hear some actual stories that I can ground our theses in real world examples. And that's one of the humanizing elements of thought leadership that I think really needs to happen more.
One of the most common, I would say even now, the most common inputs that I have in terms of as a prompt is recordings of conversations. So I have for years been recording. I default record all of our interviews, right? So when I'm doing all these ghostwriting things, but again, it was we would record it, and then we had a transcript. Transcripts weren't very good. They were we've watched this AI transcripts have gotten better and better. But now it is pretty typical for me my BFF Otter over here, for me to take the transcript out of Otter, the recording out of Otter. And that is one of my inputs in my prompt writer, in which I'm like, hey, writer, give me 10 ideas for blog posts based on this conversation. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And what I mean by like covering your blind spots is there's always, as a human, and you can tell me if this is also your pattern, if you've ever observed this, like you give a person something really long to read. Like, because in the olden days, I would have read that transcript, but I would never read it as carefully as the AI did, because I read the top, I skim the middle, and I go to the bottom. The AI goes all the way through. And I find that it's plucking out things that I otherwise would have missed.
Yes. Yeah.
And I get more material. So like out of something like that, my human brain would have discarded a bunch of stuff. I might have gotten 3 out of the 3 blog post ideas out of the interview. The AI is going to give me 10 and I'm going to pick 7.
Yeah. And
right?
To riff off of that, because we started producing this podcast. I'm very proud of it. It's called Humans of AI. Please check it out. I would have these raw transcripts of interviews or raw recordings of interviews. And in some cases, I'm like, we need to figure out where the narrative theme is, because ours isn't just like it's not just listening to 2 people talking. It's actually with narration, and it's kind of reported. So I would
do those kind of podcasts too. Michael and Grace make lots of those, and it is so much harder.
Yeah.
Or it was
so, but for me, it's much more creatively fulfilling, right? Because the storytelling thing. So one of the things we discovered was, this is a prompt, is I fed the interview to writer. I think it was the transcript. It wasn't the recording. And I said, using the hero's journey framework.
No, you didn't.
Yes, I did.
That's
I said,
great
find the moments in each phase of the hero's journey framework from this interview that would correlate to the hero's journey. And it helped me map out a really great episode, so I could start writing my own commentary and narration. And then it also helped with writing the blog post that accompanies it. Right. And it saved, again, hours of ADHD exhaustion on my part.
Of going like, wow, to move this over here.
Right.
And
I want to anticipate, like, well, wait a second. Isn't that your job as a storyteller? I'm like, my job as a storyteller is to freaking know what the hero's journey is in the first place, and to know that we need the hero's journey framework to begin with. AI is just going to sit there passively. It's not going to be like, hey, Alaura, maybe we should take the hero's journey to this. It's my job as the storyteller to say, take a look at this from this lens. Yeah.
It's also still not going to know when it comes out, like if it's any good. And like, so there's still a certain part where you, having read all the things that you read up until now, can look at that and go, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Or sometimes you're like, no,
that doesn't fly. Absolutely. So that was fun. And then another thing that I've been doing again is, when we have these massive transcripts, I'll feed it to writer and I'll say, pull 3 to 5 narrative themes from this that might be, and then I, as the writer and as the host and the executive producer, can say, okay, yeah, actually, this is really powerful. Our audience can connect with this narrative theme, right? So it's about that augmentation of thinking. It's helping me parse and surface insights in a way that I know what insights I'm looking for. I just need to pour through the material, and that the AI is helping me do that. So that's another great use case for thought leadership. It's not writing the thought leadership for me. It's helping me perceive the thought leadership.
And there's something, there's a guy whose stuff I love, who does agency consulting, and David C. Baker. And one of the things he always talks about is how hard it is to know what you're good at. So if you are truly an expert in something, it is very difficult for you to recognize those things that you're an expert in, because they're just normal to you. And he describes it as that you can't read your label, from inside your own jar problem. And what he's always recommended in the past was like, hey, if you're trying to find, he calls it, this is drop and give me 20. It's like 20 insights that you regularly deliver that make other people go, ooh, that's interesting. Right. And you have to start to figure out what that is. And for him, he said, bring somebody with you to the meeting who makes notes of like the reactions of people, like, so they can figure out, like, it's hard for you to do it yourself. And when I realized, like, again, years of recording calls, I could go back and, like, again, in Otter, I've got like 3 years of this. I was able to pull out my stop and give me 20 with a query, like with a prompt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that's something that to me, that makes it easier to find those things in your own thinking. The other way that without having to drag somebody else along, and it's unobtrusive, people forget it's there. I had some people early on say, oh, they let you record your calls. And I'm like, if they object, we can talk about it. We can negotiate it. But at this point, I have clients who start talking to the otter when the otter gets there before me. And they're like, hi, Mary Ellen's otter. Like,
Yeah.
But the otter is, again, an important part of the AI, and that is an important part of how I capture my thinking. Yes, it gives me my action items after a meeting, but it also gives me broad themes. I can pull that transcript, and more importantly, I could pull 5 transcripts, feed that into Writer, find the themes, and write something.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the other things that you like to do?
Well, again, this is more about speed to market, right? The actual creation is a partnership with me and the AI in terms of pulling those insights and feeding them, and adding them to the draft. But then there's the whole, okay, so we're producing the thought leadership. It's not content for content's sake. I not only want to equip our customers with these insights, our internal team, our SDRs, our sales team, they're counting on this type of stuff. So I now use Writer to create basically a quick briefing. Like, it's not an executive briefing. It's very targeted towards SDRs of saying, here's what this is about. Here's the target audience. Here's like 5 key takeaways that you should know about it. And, in the context of X conversation, this might be a good piece of content to share with them. So it's helping with our content distribution and having our entire organization helping with content distribution. And then it's also giving them that enablement to have conversations and get meetings with pretty, big companies. And that's saving, it's really terrible and frustrating as a content marketer, have something exist in a vacuum, even when you're doing your best, to distribute it through paid ads and organic social and things like that. But if the people in your company aren't seeing the work that you're producing and benefiting from it, then there's no purpose to it. So that's one of the big use cases I've found. And I'm actually going to be building a little custom app, again, like that brief generator, only it's going to be an SDR enablement message that I put out in Slack.
You're going to make that available inside Writer over in the app.
It might be. No, we legit are making these things available as we develop them and discover them. So yeah, but that's the thing about App Studio, though, is that you, as your team, as you discover your own unique workflows, can create your own little apps within a Writer. It's going to be coming out soon.
Yeah, I think Richard actually also made an interesting comment. He said one technique he finds helpful is to use AI to criticize your work so you can fix it.
Yes.
This is great too, because it's often feedback is tough, right? Giving feedback is tough. Asking for feedback is tough. You never know if people are going to be honest. Guess what? The AI definitely doesn't care about your feelings. And will tell you, but it's great. It's things like, consider this passage. How might this be misinterpreted? I haven't tried that one. That's actually also a good one. I think I've asked it things like, what other questions might someone, have about, I've done kind of like that, but that's an interesting, how might you misinterpret it?
Another prompt that I really like to do is plain language, just in plain language, tell me what this means. Because look, I am not a CIO of an enterprise organization, and yet I have to write thought leadership for CIOs of enterprise organizations. And if I'm looking at podcasts and they make some kind of weird jargony reference, I will plug that into Writer. I also take technical documents and research papers about AI and machine learning and put it in Writer and say, can you please map out definitions for these topics, in plain language, tell me what they are, right? So that's been a huge help.
How much do you trust those when it starts to get technical? And here's why this is when I start to get nervous. And I'm just curious where you personally draw the line. I've seen enough hallucinations around that. Like, I feel like the more like sort of niche it gets, the more dangerous it gets, like in some ways. And I've seen some like radically wrong things, like about like in terms of defining things, because it's a probabilistic model. I think one of the things that actually came out, one thing I don't use AI for is I don't use it to fact check. Like that's something that's come up.
No.
I had somebody
even in the loop always for fact checking.
Ooh, I had a client actually say that to me about a piece where she didn't like the way something came together, and she's, well, I don't know, I fact checked this in Chat GPT and it said something different, and I'm like, show me that activity stream, because like that is the information I have is coming from the government report. Like, I don't know what you're looking at, but like, because realizing it just says the next thing that is most likely to come after that, which is why it gets flat and boring. But if you don't have good information out there about a topic, the less it has to pull on, I feel like it starts to get sketchy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, regarding fact checking, yes, human in the loop always. And we use machine learning to help figure out where the claims are. It's not saying,
I love the claim detector.
The claim detector is just basically identifying what sounds like a claim. That sounds like a claim to me. You might want to check it. It doesn't say whether or not it's right. You can use something like our knowledge graph to help cross-check it. And we actually, when we have a knowledge graph, is like basically a question answering knowledge retrieval thing that you can put across your organization and train that. You have data storage of all of your different company specific documents that the model identifies for it, retrieves it, and says, here's the answer to that question. And then legitimately shares like the link to the source of the information. So it's like, here's where I got this information. So that's one thing. Number two is, in my workflows, I must have a subject matter expert besides me giving it a review. If it wasn't AI producing it, if it was one of our freelance writers, if it was me writing it, I still am going to have a subject matter expert taking a look at it. So the second pair of eyes is always going to be important. And I know that can't always be possible. And that's where you have to do that research of saying, is that true, right? Do get either a second pair of eyes or at least a second opinion through your own research.
Yeah. So, let's talk about some of these use cases just in a real practical sense. We both have talked a lot about letting the AI do the part we hate. We don't want to write briefs. I don't like to write briefs. That was actually the first thing when we started using Writer. That was the first thing I asked Rachel. I was like, can this write my briefs? That was the first thing I asked. I also hate writing proposals, and so now I'm using it to write proposal copy based on. I'll have the call. I'll talk to people all day. Like, can I take this phone call and immediately go write the proposal? Can I take the phone call and go write the brief? Now we're cooking, right?
Yeah.
So I use it for the part that I hate. We kind of chatted about that a bit. Let's talk about adapted content, because I call this the gateway drug. I think that people right now, especially if your organization is really new to implementing Gen AI, and you're trying to think about what that has to do with your thought leadership. For me, the gateway drug is to, okay, you've already been doing podcasts, you've got white papers, you've got ebooks, turn it into other stuff. Tell me your philosophy about that. Like, how do you approach adapting?
I am a remix maven in terms of if it exists, it must be turned into something else. And you can remix it until it loses its relevance, and or you just see the performance of it, bombing. So yes, with our podcast, again, we take the podcast interview, create beginnings, outlines for blog posts, or discover narrative themes to build podcast or blog posts from. We also have we can either prompt Writer to do this, or we have this highlights tool that just you put in your draft. And I think you've demoed this before, Mary Ellen, where it automatically brings out the metadata and a LinkedIn post, and I think a X tweet. Is that what we call it now?
I don't know. Nobody can make me stop.
It's Twitter. So yeah, I mean, that's just repurposing is one of the gateway drugs. And 100%. I don't really have anything to add to that.
I just think it's the safest thing to do too. I think sometimes people are worried about the voice. This is already in your brand voice.
Exactly.
So that's your input is starting back to put your stuff in here. and the stuff you get out will be more like you. So that's the safest way you could do this. And it's funny because I think as content marketers, we like novelty and we tend to move on too fast, right? We made it and we published it and we left it behind. But I think that exhaustion point is way further out than people realize, like in terms of what the audience could see. So if you can take it, and there's different paths, like, if you're making the podcast, and that's what Viola would call the weird content, it's unpredictable, things like this webinar. You take that big stuff, you do little things. You can also take little things and roll them up into big things.
Yes. And that's something we do a lot because we are moving so fast. We have to stay ahead of these conversations that our executive leadership are putting out LinkedIn posts. And they're telling me that they're about to put out these LinkedIn posts.
You have a Maybach. You have like a Maybach.
Your LinkedIn post. Right, exactly. I'm like, May, that's a blog post waiting to happen. She's like, well, make it happen. I'm like, okay, well, I can't make it happen today, but I will. I'm going to add it to the editorial roadmap. So yes, we're also doing that with our CTO because he has these really big technical ideas and people still need explainers about these big technical ideas. So me taking his LinkedIn post and saying, hey, come up with some ideas for blog posts, writer, please, based on this LinkedIn post. And then also, can you translate some of this stuff for us? And then that's a whole blog post right there. Mm-hmm. So again, atomizing and taking all of these bits and bobs of material and putting them together quickly is a huge resource for us.
Yeah, that's how you build a drumbeat for an idea. Because to me, also the piece of thought leadership, it's like, what is the idea? One of the things I try, what is the idea that people must believe in order for your product or service to be useful? Like there's something they have to believe about themselves or about you, about like there's something, and you're trying to change their mind and you don't say you're not, because like if they weren't, they'd already given you their money. There's something in there. And the example I like to give is like, even like with Zoom, early on in the pandemic, we had video conferencing for years before that. We didn't use it. We didn't use it till we had to. And then we were forced to change our minds. We changed. What did we have to believe? We had to believe that this was the best way to communicate. And this was a viable way to communicate with each other. And there was the pandemic kind of forced that one on us. So don't bank on that. Like, that's not going to be the thing that's going to make it happen for you. Like, you are going to have to change people in that way. I also think about using it in different formats. Like, so you might have that LinkedIn post. You might have had a series of LinkedIn posts that May, by the way, is the CEO. And she is they follow her on LinkedIn. She's really good.
And she's definitely a thought leader, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the epitome of thought leadership. And I think that's something to highlight is that when you have these LinkedIn posts, that's thought leadership right there. That's the seed of an idea that you can build off of. And you also have the automatic, from a content marketing perspective, testing ground for performance. If you're seeing a lot of engagement in that LinkedIn post, boom, let's build a whole package of content around this. Yeah.
Something she did, I just said this from a thought leadership standpoint. Again, back to like what you should use you're going to get all this free time, right? So you're going to use your, all these like little stuff, this gets done. So you have all this time. The kind of thing she riffs on, like she would write these posts about the things that were going wrong with the model. Like, and that the transparency around that to me, that was something, you can say we're transparent, or you can make content that literally says, hey, we made this content. And I was doing a demo and I was showing how like different content would, be created from this thing. And it turns out that the lady whose content it was based on was like, no, that's based on my source material. I promise. And I was the writer. And she didn't, not only did she not argue about it with her, she was like, okay, I have to figure out why this is happening. And then she went and posted about it publicly. Like, she is at that point thinking in public. And so if you can get through some of this other, like, I have to do this stuff kind of stuff, like, you get more time to think like that.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very cool.
Red ideas.
I got a little bit in here about pre-built prompts, just because I also think that once you get past I'm going to take my existing stuff and make some social copy out of it or whatever, I think the next sort of the training wheels I put people on, Writer has really great pre-built prompts. It's like the blog builder tool and things like that, using it to write outlines. And I'm curious, what is your approach to these? Do you use any of the pre-built prompts still, or are you just like all ask Writer all the time?
No, like I said, first of all, we language or product language, we call these the apps now. because they are like little apps within the entire platform. So I definitely use recaps a lot, which is taking webinars and any kind of recorded content and transcripts. But you can take video files and audio files and just feed it to Writer, and it will produce a fairly consistent formatted recap. And it's also like you can set what the context of the recording is, so you can say whether or not this was an event or a sales meeting or a customer interview or something, so it delivers the insights that stakeholder would want to get, which I think is very helpful. So I use that a ton when we're creating derivative content around our podcasts. The blog builder, I don't use. I know you're a fan of the blog builder.
Yeah, I know. Rachel.
But also, I'm also not like I have my freelance. I'm more of an editorial role now at Writer. So
me too, but I still like it when I have to write. I find it produces why is it different? Because here's what I'll find sometimes, and I went through this, like Rachel's our customer success person over at Writer, and she was surprised because I was like, sometimes I get better outputs out of the blog builder, out of that app, and sometimes I get it better out of kind of just going into Ask Writer and doing freestyle things. And the best thing I can say is that, like, I think that often what I think of when I say pre-built prompts and you'll call them apps, it's that it's really a series of prompts actually, and it helps craft there's a whole lot of stuff
in the back end. There's a bunch of prompts happening,
and you're not thinking about it. So it's like we kind of running all this for you, and it's like there's some things that if it's finance, which is very straightforward, it will produce very well structured content. And going back to what is my weakness? What's my weakness? It's in the structure.
Yes, and that's mine too. And that's why the blog outline app I use more than the actual the built out blog builder, because I think the blog builder is very much focused on SEO, which not to say that thought leadership and SEO are mutually exclusive. It's just I feel like when you're working with AI from an SEO lens, it tends to produce much more generic.
It does.
Much more, here's what you can expect to this structure to look like, because I mean, it's nice that it's considering what the search intent is behind the topic, that it's answering those questions, but our particular strategy is not as SEO driven. So that's why I prefer the blog outline to the entire blog builder.
Probably do that too. I think, how I use it. So I'll use it and I'll make this, and I'm really treating it like a rough draft. Like it gives me that structure and I see what pieces I might be missing, and it ggets me down to this other piece. And then I bounce over to Ask Writer and I say things like, and I go to just that section, right? Because even if I'm writing an SEO piece that's 2,500 words long, and now I've got to have this 500 word section about this one part, and there's a framework, but I know I want our framework, into the company, not this other framework. I will say, Ask Writer, write me a 500 word overview of that. And it'll write it on my little thing. And then I'll go, and then I'll prop it and I'll put it back in there.
So that's the thing, Mary Ellen, with your apps, once you get access to the App Studio, you can build your own version of that's specific to RepCap's like blog format, right? That's specific to.
I think that might just be me.
And it could be, I also like. I see when I use Ask Writer, it's because, they say that writing is the art, is thinking out loud, right? Writing is thinking. And I feel like when you've got that conversational interface, it helps you really externalize your thinking a little bit more. So I think that there's a certain point in the process where you're like, oh, it's now time for me to externalize my thinking. Basically. Right?
Yeah.
And there's moments in the process where you're like, just do it for me because I don't want to have to think about it.
Right.
Which for me is the structure. But also from an editorial lens, I want to say, is this the right structure? Is this the story that I want to tell? Does this ladder up in a logical order to the topic that we're trying to address? We have a checklist, by the way, that I've put into snippets through Writer. That's an editorial checklist that automatically in every blog post draft we have living at the top of it. So yeah, there's that type of, it's a give and take between this very structured, formalized, repeatable stuff that's all about formatting and structure And then freestyling, as you have this on this
let's call it. So
slide, is thinking out loud.
Left. Tell me about your thinking. So because I think you're really good at this. It sounds to me like this is where you really get in here. So I describe this, I call it freestyle. It's where I'm using Ask Writer. There's other tools you can use that way, but this is where I use it to tear through ideas really fast. Okay. So one of the things I might do, like your example about the hero's journey, like I'll sit there and I'll have that interview, right? I'll have that really great interview. And I'll say, okay, write me a script, an explainer script, like as an animating. Okay, no, don't like that. Okay, now rewrite it as direct to camera, like something, I mean, I'll take it like no matter what the format is, and I'll say, okay, I don't like that. The very thing is like, you don't like that.
It's prototyping. It's prototyping an idea, right?
So fast, and I do it for writing, and I do it for visuals because I'm also, although I'm now taking drawing lessons here again, things we're doing at age 46. Like I am learning how to draw now, right? Yeah. After 40 something years ago, I'm a word person. That's clearly not. That can't be true anymore. And so I'm learning with my hands, not digitally. I have a very old school art teacher where I'm drawing things with my hands, but I use it. I can whip through so many bad ideas so fast.
You prototype. It's like, old school, it would be filling your wastebasket with a bunch of crumpled ideas. It's the same thing. And it's freeing, right? That you're able to fail fast, which means you're able to learn fast. And I think that's also really helpful with AI, is seeing what you don't like, so you can really start creating a larger concrete picture of what you do like, and what is you, what is your brand, what is your voice. And I think that helps distill it for you. What was something else that, by the way, well, we could talk about the vision model in a second, but mind mapping is another way that you can start using Writer. Is you can draw a mind map and then put that image into Writer, and there's an image analyzer that can interpret that and turn it into text.
Oh, that's a new toy. That's a new toy.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about your new toy?
Well, and that's also, and the new toy is also, for me as a content marketer, alt text is huge and a pain in the butt. It's incredibly important for accessibility and SEO, but it takes so long to try, as a sighted person, to try to describe images. So we have the image analyzer. We have another app that image analyze, and then you can ask it, turn it into alt text. So I see the hearts. Yeah, that's a big one. That made me do a happy dance once we made that live.
You're also getting back to this accessibility thing, right? I think this is something, like, in terms of being inclusive, and like this is something that I think are important values for both of us. And this is also something that I get really excited about too. The more we actually mentioned, like, screen readers are another one where that is AI, y'all. Like, that is AI doing that, like taking things and going, well, I can read it, but people who can't read, we all consume information. Like, and I actually love that, because I think
there's the curb cut. Have you heard of the curb cut concept? No. Which is the more accessible you make things for people who are the most in need of the curb cut is that wheelchair ramp, right? When they created that as part of the ADA legislation, not only did it make it more accessible for wheelchair users, but mothers with strollers can cross the street without, hurting their babies. You have all people who are just having grocery carts across the street, all of that. So the more accessible you make your content, to make it about content, the more everybody benefits. Because you never know, people as you age lose vision, and you need that. You need that accessibility. But that's a whole other subject.
Captions. We talk about captions. Again, everything that you make, I'd rather see you put the energy into, like, that one really good idea. Like, you've got that really good concept and you're going all in on that. And it's like figuring out all the ways to express it. Like, and there's so many, you're actually far more likely, in my mind, in my opinion, to get penetration, to get, like, exposure, to actually change people's adoption of an idea. If you get in there and just keep going. And, like, so it's like, okay, I wrote this blog post, and now I'm going to do here's my social piece. Okay, I'm going to make this video. But when I make this video, it's very important that my video have captions, and they have closed captions.
Mm-hmm.
Because closed captions, this is one of those things we talk about, like what's the difference between captions and subtitles? And it's like, well, I don't want burned in. Don't give me burned in. Give me closed captions, because people can turn those on, they can turn those off, and they can translate them to different languages.
Yes. And that's another thing that writers doing now is it's going to be translating across languages. We've got 30 languages in our model, which also is about accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I wanted to bring up in freestyling, and I know we're getting close on time, something, again, with helping me think out loud is, I was talking before about turning technical concepts into plain language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I take it a step further and I say, what's an analogy with this very technical concept that would be accessible to a non-technical reader? Great analogy that we had about this algorithm and why it doesn't work the best for a particular type of tech feature that people are trying to build within the enterprise. And it came up with this fantastic idea about a fishing net and about capturing data, and how there are different styles of fishing that I never would have thought of, or I would have come to it eventually, but it got me there a lot faster. And then the light bulb went on, right? And then building, when we're talking about humanizing thought leadership, analogies are an incredible way of bringing storytelling to your content. Grounding customer stories and things like that are another way. That 90% point, taking it to that 100% point, is bringing all of that storytelling, analogies, customer stories, real world examples. And AI can't do that. So that's where your human self comes in and really directs that thought leadership.
And gets that stuff out of people, because that stuff is in people. That's like that, the thought leader, that's in people. And more conversations, again, get into that weird content. And then the other thing I would say that I do sometimes is that I will actually go in and I will ask it to write that generic thing. Sometimes I will straight up say, okay, use the blog builder, and I'm giving you no additional inputs. Give me the most generic thing. That to me is then, okay, well, we're not doing that.
Yes.
Right. That's not the thing. Right. It's interesting with the metaphors. What I find, unless you're careful and you begin to direct it, I'd love to see your prompts around that at some point, because I find it goes for the same stuff over and over again. And I'll do things to try to push it, because again, where's it drawing from?
Well, I mean, let me correct it. Correct this impression. I'm not necessarily using that analogy to get to the reader there. It could be to get me there as the researcher. And then I can say, if it gets me there as the researcher, then I can do the writing. Or, or I can say, hey, this is a great analogy. Write a little, 2-sentence thing to fit into this paragraph. And then I craft it from there. But yes, you're right. Sometimes it can be very repetitive. And I think it's also a prompting challenge. So, and that's a whole other webinar we could have, which is just about
I want to give prompts. Y'all, you do some really great content on this. So whether you're a writer or customer or not, the webinars that y'all do, there's one you do on prompt crafting that I think is really good if people are looking for resources on that. I think it's interesting as I'm coming even through this conversation, where my thinking has even evolved a bit, because again, this is all moving really fast, and we're both working in kind of slightly similar overlapping roles in different ways. And I'm here running a small agency, and you're working, you're just talking to everybody. But it's interesting to me thinking how we've gone from at the beginning of this. I'll go back, since we're at time, I'll go all the way back to a little over a year ago. So we were a year and 3 months whenever the OpenAI thing happened, and everybody's got ChatGPT, and a lot of people sat down. I mean, good writers, good thinkers sat down and they typed stuff in there, and they're like, ew, right? And then there's half of us, the other half are going, ooh, this is amazing. I can make all the content in the world, right? And I think we've gotten to this place where people expected it just to happen. And what I think has happened for me, and in general of what you're describing, is I think of it less as I'm sitting down and I have any expectation that it's just going to generate something for me, to use yours and Richard's preferred word, and publish it, right? That instead it is actually, it's like a partner for me, right? I am working with the co-pilot thing, and we've talked about that a lot, but it's that is what's happened, where I'm arguing with the AI.
That's thinking out loud too.
When
I think
it's arguing back, what are we going to do when it argues back? Like, are you afraid of the singularity?
Hopefully, like I said, Star Trek nerds. We'll have a bunch of Commander Datas walking around. Hopefully, if we teach it the right way, and if we have the right people developing the technology that with an eye towards responsibility, then I don't fear the singularity, because there are humans behind this technology. So that's my little lecture.
Are they good? To go to the other Star Trek direction. Have you watched Discovery? That AI is not nice.
No.
But it is. It's what we're putting into it. I think all the other things I'd say that I appreciate about Writer, because Writer also functions essentially as our Grammarly. So like it does a bunch of jobs. It is not just just
generative AI. Right.
Thinking about like what kind of biases are coming in and flagging that language and those assumptions, things. This is what I mean. You do have to watch the bias, because I think the visuals are actually worse right now than the language. I think we've gotten a better handle on it in copy. But things like those the professional headshot things, where you give them a photo and they turn into it. And it's like, you tell, make me my professional headshot. And they're basically making people whiter. Right. Like, and they're making people thinner, and they're making people younger. And it's like, what? Well, like, I just wanted you to smooth out my gray hair up here, like a little, like I didn't need you to remove it. So I think that I try to keep that in mind. And I think the more I think about it like that, and I think of it as an equally biased, pluses and minuses kind of partner in the work, and less of it's going to do the work for me.
Right.
I get better stuff. So I don't know. Last words.
Geez, now you put me on the spot.
What's your favorite Pokemon? What's your favorite Pokemon?
My favorite Pokemon is Psyduck, and that's because he brings out he's a reflection of me, which is somebody who's like very sensitive and takes in the world and gets overwhelmed by it. But then once he calms down, he can, actually, his power is actually very painful for him. I don't know. I just find him a very intriguing Pokemon. But anyway, that's completely beside the point. My last word should not be about Psyduck. I just want to thank you. This was it was a great conversation. I think it's really fantastic to continue to have these conversations. This is an entirely new frontier, speaking of Star Trek, for all of us. And I think that as we discover what we care about and how we want the path to go forwards, the more we'll connect with like-minded people and make a really great future for everybody. So that's my last
what can I say about that? This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for doing
Thank you.
That. Yeah, everybody go go work on your prompts. Go craft your prompts. So
take care, everyone.
Right.